Hello, hello, hello. It's Stephanie here, and welcome to episode 89 of the Rent to Rent Success podcast. Do I say this every week? But I'm very excited today. We have with us Richard Brown, someone I've long admired, learned so much from. He is an experienced property investor with decades of experience. He's an investor, he's a developer, he's a financier. He has hosted the Property Voice podcast for over 6 years, and after many weeks, months, and years of binge listening the podcast, I feel like I know Richard so well. And I did interview him for our Property Game Changers podcast too. But I'm so excited today for two reasons. Richard is a public author, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and we're going to be talking about his most recent book, which is called The Complete Guide to Property Finance, which is something that all investors are interested in. So we will talk about that today. And the other thing that's super excited is Richard is on the acquisition trail, not just buying properties, buying rent-to-rent businesses. So he's recently acquired Capital Living. It's a co-living operator in London with an annual turnover of over £2.5 million. So I'm really excited to delve into that and talk to Richard about that acquisition. So welcome to the show, Richard Brown.
Stephanie, hi. Thanks so much for inviting me back. It's really great to see you again. I'm always delighted to accept your invitation.
Brilliant.
My favourite lady in rent-to-rent.
Thank you so much. So, Richard, we always start off with the question, tell us a little bit about yourself. And maybe you could start off with your location.
Oh, you mean physically right now? Yeah, I happen to be talking. I haven't probably got the best backdrop to do it justice, but I'm actually in Rio de Janeiro at the moment, in Brazil. And the irony is, so we got a home in São Paulo, but my wife had the girls over last weekend, and so I was banished. So I came to see my mates in Rio, and I'm still here because there was a bit of football going on, so I extended the stay. So I'm in Rio de Janeiro right now, if that's the easy answer to that.
Yeah, and we've talked before about how properties allowed you to have this, location-free lifestyle while you're managing business and developments in the UK and maybe in other parts of the world. Perhaps you could paint a picture of what your property and business interests look like today.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's evolved and or pivoted as we've as I've moved along, and probably started in a similar way to a lot of people with kind of the buy-to-let type of thing way back now, about 12 years ago, I think it was. But I never did vanilla buy-to-let. I always have to add value. That's my thing. I have to add value to a property asset in some way. So I think for the first 8 years, it was pretty much sort of single lets, went into HMOs. And then over the last few years, in particular, conversions and developments. And that was pretty hairy, actually. And then much more recently, I'm looking at blocks and portfolios from an acquisitions point of view. That's one way of scaling. And very, very recently, i.e. this year, myself and my business partner are on the acquisition trail, and we're buying businesses. So we're looking to expand our property interests in terms of not just property assets, but also in terms of property businesses. And they're not, the one we just bought is a rent-to-rent business, but it's more, we're trying to assemble a group, if you like, or a larger sized agency business. So we won't restrict ourselves necessarily to rent-to-rent. There will be other types of agency business as well. So I guess, I'm kind of busy with a few different things, perhaps a bit too busy in some respects, but that's kind of a quick potted view.
Yeah, no, that's great. And because I've been listening to your podcast for a long time, the Property Voice podcast, I'll put that on the screen if you're watching. And there is also a website, theproptyvoice.net. Then I kind of know when you started out from corporate, and then you stepped it up quite massively into these bigger developments, and now you're buying, big businesses.
Yeah, businesses and blocks more recently. And funny enough, obviously you need to have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit about you to do the latter. But the blocks and portfolios is also quite interesting, particularly in the current market, because there's not a lot of stock. There's a lot of competition for deals, and so people are sort of hunting in quite a small pool, and prices are going a bit crazy. There isn't so much value if you're a value investor or a value-adding investor like me. So perhaps looking a little bit up the food chain, there's less competition than is perhaps a little bit lower. So that's been interesting.
Yeah, well, perhaps we may have time to come back to that, but I do want to move on, Richard, to your book, The Complete Guide to Property Finance. And I know that you have over 50 plus financing solutions beyond buy to let. So I'd love you to talk to us, Richard, about what's in the book, so we can get an insider view.
Thank you. This has been another passion project. It's been evolving for a number of years. It's probably, I think, 5 years in evolution, this book. And it was born out of a mastermind group. Funnily enough, there was a mastermind group that a few of us formed, and we started to talk about creative financing techniques. And there was originally about 6 of us, but there were sort of 3 or 4 hardcore. And we started to talk about, this. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be good if there was a kind of a purpose to this, And the idea was sown about it being a book. Well, that was 5 years ago, and nothing really happened. But it's always been there. And there was a sort of a rough draft of some, strategies that were floating around, and nothing was really done with them. And the purpose of telling you that is it became a monster. Actually, as you just alluded to, more than 50 different financing solutions or strategies, if you like. And so in order to put that together, it took quite a bit of work and assembling that. And I break it down into 3 core areas, which is what I call institutional, alternative, and creative financing. Rent-to-rent being in the creative space of those who are wondering, because yes, rent-to-rent is one of the strategies. And the way I kind of looked at it, perhaps retrospectively, was in terms of institutional finance, that's kind of what everybody knows, right? That's a bank or a lender who you can Google and normally talk to on the telephone. And they may do things like buy-to-let or bridging finance or development finance, but that's what they do. And then there's this middle category. Probably I've spent a lot of space in this area with alternative financing, and that looks like finance, but is. I had Skype on my screen there. I don't know if you saw that, but that was a bit spooky. No. The alternative is it is financing, but it comes from an alternative source. So you wouldn't necessarily find them on Google or on the high street. It could be a friend or a family member, for example, or a crowdfunding platform that you might find on Google. So that's the alternative channel. And then the creative one is a solution that mimics finance, but uses alternative contract structures, creative contract structures, such as rent-to-rent. Lease options would be another example. So just a few. And so it became a monster, and it became a labor of love as well, because my routine was every weekend morning this year, I would spend about 3 hours just locked away putting the book together, and then realizing there's not just 10 strategies or 20, there's ultimately 50. And so that's it. But I think I'm done now, and no doubt somebody will write to me and go, you missed one, but hopefully I've captured most of them.
Yeah, and I've had a look at the proof of the book, and I'm very interested in the creative strategies, because obviously the other ones are a little bit better known perhaps, but I think there will be things in there that people won't have seen before, and it's definitely worth buying the book. And by the time you're listening to or watching this episode, we think it will be on Amazon, but we will put a link in the show notes for you so that you can go and grab the book. But meantime, you will be able to contact Richard through thepropertyvoice.net. And Richard, is there anything else that we need to know about the book?
Is there anything else? Well,
Lots of things.
I can go on. Yeah, I could go on. I guess I feel particularly interested in the creative angle. So, there's even one chapter called Best of the Rest, which is 12 solutions, including squatting. So, legal squatting, that is, so that's adverse possession, in other words. So it's quite a long-term strategy. It might take you about 12 years before you can legally claim rights to vacant land or property. But that is a strategy, and I guess it's no money down. It's just a long time to wait. Yeah. I think some of the other ones there are, particularly in that space, if you wanted to go into them, but there's a number of the option styles or the conditional completion style contracts. So I've done a few deals recently myself with exchange with delayed completion, and also conditional exchange. So you can let something happen to take the risk away, or you can let something happen to increase the value by utilizing one of those two solutions. Of course, you've got assisted sale or some sort of performance contract where you don't even need to own the property, but you can bring your know-how to a property owner, create a win-win solution probably, and they retain their property and you add the value, and then you share the spoils. So that would be another potential solution. So there's quite a few there I could elaborate on, but
I would love it if you could actually, you mentioned you've got some examples of exchange with delayed completions that you've done, because I think that does put some color onto it when you give an example of perhaps how you've used one of the creative strategies.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, you just saying that has made me realize, I think a lot of the creative strategies tend to work well if you've got what I call a sophisticated seller or someone who's a bit savvy. So, I mean, without doing anybody any disrespect, but if you go to a little old lady who's got a house and you say, I've got this fancy solution for you, if you could let me take it on, and here's this contract that you've never seen before, they probably won't get their head around it, Whereas if you're dealing with, and I'll give you an example. So I was dealing with the owner of this particular property was a finance director in a large PLC. So he was pretty financially aware, and probably got options and things like that when he's pay packet. So he kind of understood all this multi-layers of how to pay for things. But he got himself a bit of a problem because the property that he had, somebody had done an HMO conversion for him. They didn't do a very good job. And so he was left with a non-compliant HMO. He's a busy finance director. Given the job to someone else, they'd landed him in the doodah, and the local licensing team were basically saying, we're not giving you a license. And so he was like, I didn't want to deal with the company anymore. This is him speaking. Don't want to deal with this company anymore because obviously they don't know what they're doing. So I'm going to sell the property. So, but if you can imagine, he had what was then converted into 6 beds, 6 ensuite HMO, but with no shared living space property, and then trying to market it to homeowner buyers who are going to view with a ensuite in the lounge. So they couldn't, get their head around it. And then from an investor point of view, obviously someone might be interested in HMO, but it's not compliant. And so you'd have to lose a room probably to regain some living space, which would devalue the property, from his point of view. So what I started talking to him about is well, I can probably fix that problem. Can you give me time to fix that problem? And if you can give me time to fix that problem, I can probably help you get a better outcome. And so he kind of said yes. And, we were testing and which way we could go with this. He didn't want a particularly long-term solution, and he did want certainty, that I was going to follow through. And equally, I wanted certainty as well, because I was going to invest some money. So I invested some money we did lose one of the rooms to create a living space. And we also converted a garage to regain a living space. So we went back to 6 beds. But we did a bit of a reconfiguration, but there's some investment involved in that. And we agreed, I think it was a 7-month gap between exchange and completion. And he was happy to wait to get his money. he could get something close to what he was hoping for, rather than probably taking a big hit if we'd have done it in a more traditional way. And we were able to effectively leverage him as a bank, for want of a better description, for that period of time. And he was happy to do that. So we didn't have to have any bridging finance. The other thing is, between exchange and completion, we added value to the property. So we made it legally compliant. We filled it with tenants. We obviously got it licensed. And then when the valuer came round, because we were going to get it refinanced, to realize some of our equity, if you like, they valued it based on the investment value at that point in time. So there was the delta. So we created a gap between the value I was paying the owner and, of course, what the revaluation was. So we created this value add, and then we were able to pull out quite a lot of our cash in the process. So that was a really nice deal, and that was exchange with delayed completion. And that's, the variations of that I've worked on. Actually, I did none for about 10 years, and then I've done about 3 in a year or something. So there's been a few of those. And
yeah.
There's a variation on it is a conditional exchange. So an exchange with delayed completion is based on time. So that's the condition, time. But a conditional exchange is based on something happening. Often planning, but doesn't have to be planning. It could be fixing an issue of some description, and then you just work out, well, we're the investor, we're the solution, provider. So what I keep talking about with this book, for example, it's about having tools in a toolbox. So the 50 different solutions, they're tools. And so once you know what they are and you've got them in your mind, you're thinking, what tool am I going to use for this job? So I view myself as a solution consultant, really, or a financial engineer, depending, whichever way you want to look at it. And that's why I'm asking questions of owners predominantly, what is the situation here, and therefore what tool might fit the circumstance. So the purpose of this book is so that people have got awareness of all the different tools. And you, like my toolbox at home, there's quite a lot of them that don't get used. So it could well be that you never use all of these tools, but at least it's there. And that little Allen key might come in handy. It's just for that IKEA piece of furniture that you need to sort of tighten up one day.
So true. And what it unlocks is that knowledge unlocks opportunity. Because had you not been savvy, Richard, with these strategies, when that property became available, you wouldn't have been able to take advantage of the opportunity, perhaps because the seller wanted a certain price, you needed certain things, but it looked as though the two wouldn't meet. But because you knew about all of the tools, you were able to suss out what the seller needs and which tools will be most appropriate to give you both what you want.
Exactly that. And, I think it was a deal that wouldn't happen otherwise. And if it did happen, it would be win-lose.
Yes.
Somebody would not come out of that well, probably the owner, unfortunately. But because of being aware of that solution and being able to articulate it and discuss it with the owner, and him being able to understand that and comprehend it and be agreeable to that, it became win-win. So I think, and that's great, isn't it? Because he went away happy, I went away happy, and otherwise he probably wouldn't have been very happy, actually, because I think ultimately a homeowner might have said, "I'm going to buy this, but I'm going to have to rip out two en-suites to live and eat, in this house."
Yes, yeah. So if you do want to pick up the complete guide to property finance, you'd be crazy not to if you are a property investor, then do go over to Amazon and you'll be able to see it there. And we will be adding a link to the show notes once it's published as well. So the other thing that I'm very excited about that you have recently done, Richard, is that you have bought, okay, we could call it an HMO property management business, but for my audience, I just want to say it's a rent-to-rent business. It's a guaranteed rent business, and it's turning over 2.5 million every year. So I want to start at the beginning with this and say to you, Richard, you're a developer, you're a property investor, you buy properties. I don't know that you even manage your own properties. So what made you want to get into the property management business?
To manage my own properties? No, no. So I think multiple streams of income is one of the obvious answers to that. If you look at some of my development activities in recent times, they take a long time to produce results.
Yeah.
And it's what I call lumpy money. So development is often lumpy money. You do a lot of work over an extended period of time, and then you get a big lump at the end of it. And that might be a 12-month, 18-month, 2-year period, depending what you're doing, obviously. And so, that makes it uncertain and unpredictable. It can be rewarding, but it can also be risky. So it's a nice hedge to have different interests. So I have my own portfolio. I'm looking at blocks and complete portfolios to scale, rather than just doing ones and twos. And if I buy a block, for example, I know I'm digressing away from the business, but just quickly on that one, if I buy a block of say 12 flats in one go, it's I can probably do that in a single transaction if they're complete, and I don't have to develop it. Obviously, I look for a value add. So that's that angle. But then what myself and my business partner really fancied doing, don't know why, we're both entrepreneurs, this is why. And we just have ideas. And so we just thought that it would be great to pull together an agency, business. And we think we could do it quite well. And we think there is an opportunity to improve standards and service and deliver something really good into the marketplace, particularly at this point in time. Because if I'm looking at trends, a lot of people are going, why are you stepping into an agency when actually we're looking at cutting out agencies with technology? Right, because possibly that's the direction ultimately. So why have I done that? It seems crazy. I am a firm believer that it's a mix and match. You combine technology with people, and you can deliver great service through technology, but you don't have the human touch. Yeah. And so I think there's a hybrid, and that's really what I'm excited about, is building sort of a hybrid model that leverages good technology, but is not just technology driven. And equally, it's not massively, there's not like loads of people in an office somewhere, like a sweatshop, working to deliver the service, which is expensive. So that doesn't make it economic for landlords, for example. And it doesn't, but it might deliver reasonable service levels to tenants, but it doesn't make it economic. So it's this blend. So co-living is something we're really interested in, because we see that as an emerging trend. What is co-living? But it's not just people sharing a house. There is more to it than that. So I think the blend of technology with the increased service, the co-living model, and I think we can build something, that's going to be rewarding and of value, both to ourselves, but obviously to our stakeholders. So we're just building that and having a lot of fun, and weekends working and stuff,
Yeah, so it's very exciting to me, and it definitely is a cash flow business. While you were talking, I just quickly tried to get on my calculator and work it out, the possible cash flow. So it's a bigger, in terms of rent-to-rent businesses, the typical business. It's a bigger business. It's a lot of properties. I think you said over 200 rooms, and tell us about, well, I would love to know, first of all, if you're able to talk about this, Richard, how do you value a rent-to-rent business?
That is a good question, because when we're having the negotiation with the previous owner, that was, the topic. But do you know the answer of how you value any business, Stephanie?
Do you just put your finger in the air?
Well, pretty much. But how you value a business is you count the number of owners and multiply it by 1 million.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because everybody wants the magic million. Okay, yeah. So that I didn't pay anything like that, by the way. But people tend to start, and then they reverse engineer to their metric of choice, which helps them. So in agency businesses, letting agency businesses, they tend to be valued on a multiple of their annual revenue. Normally 1 times, maybe 1.5 times their annual revenue. But what's the annual revenue in a rent-to-rent business? It's is it the rent roll? Well, technically it is, but actually, as you know, you've got such a heavy outgoing, which is the rent you pay to the landlord. So it's such a high percentage of the cost that you can't count that. Whereas a traditional letting agent will take their 10%, for argument's sake, of the rent roll, but that's their turnover. So a traditional agency would be valued on those 10% accumulated. But I think with a rent-to-rent business, there's only there's possibly more. There's two ways of looking at it. One is the gross profit, as they call it. So that's the delta between your gross rent coming in and your rent going out. I'm a bit of a tight Yorkshireman, so I also discount what I call the direct unavoidable costs, like utilities, for example, because there's no way I can avoid those. So I land at what I call a contribution figure. That's the financial term, the accounting term. Don't want to get too complex on financial number crunching stuff. The other alternative is you could do it on a multiple of the net profit. A lot of businesses are valued on a multiple of net profit. So, but sometimes it's hard, if the business isn't making a profit, there is zero. It doesn't matter about what multiple you use; it's not worth anything. It's worth zero. But and then other people go, well, it's maybe not making that much money, but it's got goodwill, it's got brand value, it's got the client base. I think that one of the best things about a rent-to-rent business, don't tell anyone, is the fact that you've normally got long-term recurring income, and that is gold dust. Because with let's say a traditional agency, you maybe get a 12-month arrangement with a landlord, for argument's sake, and then it could churn, and you could lose that contract. So at least you got 12 months, but it could churn. Whereas with rent-to-rent business, you could have 5 years, for example. And so that's something that I find interesting is if I've got an income stream for 5 years, I've got predictability for my business. And so that's one of the reasons I'm interested in rent-to-rent businesses. Some people think I'm crazy because I'm also locked into paying a fixed fee to the landlord for such a long time. So kind of, it does cut both ways. And so you need to know, you need to get your numbers right. And during the pandemic, this business that I bought, it suffered. It had 20 to 30% vacancy rate at one point, which if you're paying a fixed fee, more than whatever that is, 70% of the rent there to the landlord, then it can be painful. So valuing it, I think, on a gross profit basis was how the previous owner was looking at things. I was looking at things more on what I call contribution. So it's taking off some of those utilities and council tax, seeing what was left and working out a cost to operate the business and maybe make a few quid as well. But I did put a value on the recurring revenue stream of the contracts.
Yes. Well, that was a very thorough and detailed answer. It's one of the reasons why I enjoy listening to your podcast, because you give a lot of answers like that. So very interesting in hearing about how you valued it. And it will be interesting for viewers and listeners who run a rent-to-rent business to also have that insight that if they're building up their business to sell it, some of the things that they ought to think about. Having now bought the business and taken over the administration of it, is there what advice, Richard, would you give to people who want to grow and sell a business? What should they do or not do?
Could be a long list.
It's a big question, isn't it?
It is a big question. And I think the first thing to say is this: if you're trying to build a business at all, it should be able to survive without you. So that's the very first thing. So a lot of businesses for sale are owner-operator businesses. And I've had these conversations. We're on the mergers and acquisitions trail. So we're having quite a lot of conversations with business owners right now. By the way, if you'd like to have a conversation with us, please do. But if you are an owner-operator and you're not paying yourself a market rate salary for the work you do, so this is above the line, not in dividends, this is above the line salary for the manager or general manager of that business, then you've got a false picture. So if you present that to sell to someone like me, I'm immediately going to go, I need to put a manager in that business and I need to pay for that manager. So a lot of people go, we're making whatever figure you want, say 80,000 a year, just pick 80,000 a year. And what are you paying yourself? Well, I'm paying myself, the minimum of like 12 grand a year or 8 grand a year to avoid, all sorts of bits. Well, that's not a market rate salary for a manager of a business. So you need to put that back in and then look at the things. So that's the first thing. So the second thing is, of course, apart from the financial value that it creates by getting it to replace yourself, is to have systemize things. And like I was alluding to earlier, if it's heavily people focused, that's a high cost, and there's a lot of repeating. There's a lot of repeating processes. You can automate that, systemize it, outsource it. So I think you're pretty keen on that type of process yourself, Stephanie. So we already had a chat before about your approach.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things. I think the other thing, if you take rent to rent in particular, I see and I've been offered deals which just don't stack up economically. And if you're running on this sort of gross profit margin or this contribution margin that's not sufficient to cover you, including funding things like voids, for example, then you could be in trouble very quickly because you're on usually you've got a fixed cost basis. So I don't know. I think you alluded to the fact that perhaps in the recent times, people are trying to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of the rent commitment to the landlord. COVID clauses. So the business we bought does have COVID clauses now, which means that if there's another lockdown and people can't go into the property, we're not on a bound to make the full rent payment to the landlord. So that's de-risking the commitment a little bit by having that type of thing. Or you can even have a grace period before you've let it, because it takes time to fill a new house. So the risk is really what I'm getting at there. So if you can manage and mitigate away some of the risk that you might have, that's going to put you in good stead to run the business, and obviously make the business more compelling to a potential buyer as well.
Oh my goodness. This is such gold. So I just want to call out and just summarize what Richard said there. If you do want to grow and sell your business, you need to have a business that survives without you. And Richard went into some of the ways that might show on the financials, but also it needs to show on the operations, that literally the business can run and operate without you. And to do that, also, you need systems in place. You need great people for an HMO business anyway. You need great people and you need good systems. And then we talked about de-risking. So you mentioned COVID clauses, and absolutely we do have COVID clauses in our contracts, and we also have clauses which say we can give the properties back irrespective of anything else. And on some contracts that's 3 months notice we give, and on others it's 6 months notice that we give. But it can be whatever we give, and they're one-way break clauses for us. And the landlords, or in our case, it's mainly landlords, but landlords or letting agents can only break if we don't meet our commitments and obligations. So if we don't pay the rent, or if we don't look after the property, if we don't do what we're contractually obligated to do, they can break their contract. But if we do what we're doing, then they need to ride to the term. So it is important to have the right contracts in place that do protect you and also the other partners that you're working with. I would, Richard, what else has either surprised you since you've taken ownership? Well, let's talk about two things. First of all, what has surprised you in the process of doing your due diligence on this rent-to-rent business before buying it?
Oh, you want that one now? Okay. So it was interesting because the process the seller went through, they were kind of driving us down a certain process steps, and it was like I call it's like a slow reveal. So we'll see this bit, and then you see that bit, and then you see this bit, and so it was difficult. It was really difficult to get in there and really see what was going on with the business. So, for example, even right to the end, we didn't really have a proper test drive of the system they were using. So we took a view on that. Ultimately, we could have done finally, but we just decided no. And they have a bespoke system, which is written just for that. I think that's what bespoke means. So that was and to be honest, there's a massive risk with a bespoke system. So we're not sure what we're going to do with that. It costs a lot of money to maintain, and we're the only person paying for the maintenance of the system. Whereas if you buy something which is a software as a service, or where there's multiple, clients or users, you spread the development costs, you spread the support costs across multiple buyers. So I'll give you an example. Now we need to change the contract terms of some of our members, call them members in our world, but they're tenants, and it's hard coded in the system. And we've been quoted £5,000. Oh no, sorry, that one's 500. No, half a day, £500 by the coder to change that, and that's ridiculous. So, and then we have been quoted £5,000 to do a rewrite for the Stripe API is changing, and so we've been quoted £5,000 just to make it work once that changes. So that's not good. So, but we kind of we knew that, but it's become real as we stepped into the business. So that was one thing. I think the other thing is, I'm going to be very honest, we stepped into it, and there's issues that need to be tidied up, because there was an 18 month tricky period, let's say that, during COVID and lockdown. And, the previous owner was doing well to keep things going, but there were, a few gardens that hadn't been cut, and a couple of tenants who had a hole in the ceiling for 3 months, and so you kind of get in the picture. So there are a few things that kind of hadn't been addressed, and so we walked into that. And so poor Kemi, who's working with me, she's like much more hands-on than me, bless her. Actually, I should have said she's my favorite person in Rent to Rent, but
yes. I'll take second place. She's doing
she's been wading through that, and sometimes she's got a glass of wine at the end of the night, and she said, "Do you want to hear the latest?" And we just share a story about a tenant who's bashed their head, and the reason they bashed their head is that we're trying to charge them a repair, and they're doing a little counterclaim thing. But we talk to them. That's the thing. Once you talk to people and you understand where are they coming from, you can normally work things out. So we have a lot of talking and conversations with owners and tenants, and also local residents. So that's been a shock. It's 30 days today, by the way, since we own or round about today, that we own the business. So we've had our hands full sort of getting an understanding. And equally, we want to take a step back. We want to look at how do we want to organize things from a systems and operations point of view, but also how do we want to grow and scale? And we do want to grow and scale, but we're kind of firefighting a little bit, to be honest, working out what systems and personnel we want and what structure, and then fight, well, how do we acquire more and where do we acquire more? And that's where I spend my time. Poor Kemi, she's dealing with the, people banging their head and the holes in the ceiling. And it's not to say she doesn't do any strategic thinking, because she's a big strategist, but she reserves that until about 11 o'clock at night when she's bushed with a glass of wine in her hands.
Yeah, no, very interesting. So a few interesting things you mentioned there. One of them was software and the importance of software. And obviously that really ties in with systems, because obviously nowadays the systems are software based, so that you can access them from anywhere in the world, from any device, and all of that malarkey. And what you talked about there, because software systems, there's always a cost to them. But with these bespoke systems, you just imagine you pay that cost all up front, and then that's you. But actually, you've got all the maintenance costs, and then you've got these changing costs, which are really quite substantial. It's now making me think that our software costs, it's not just our property management software, but we've got, obviously accounting software, the property management software, the online form completion software that we use for the tenant information form, reservation forms, check-in forms, check-out forms. There's a whole swathe of them, but that was just interesting.
By the way, you just mentioned there is a whole swathe of them. So to tell me who has got an end-to-end system, which deals with tenant find, which deals with management, which deals with repairs and maintenance, which deals with rent collection. There isn't one system really that deals with all that. So you end up stitching things together. I think to be fair to the previous owner, that's why. Sorry, I didn't mean to. He took a decision. This was 4 or 5 years ago to build his own system, because I don't think he was happy with what he saw in the market. The unfortunate thing, though, is in the last 4 or 5 years, the market has gone on a long way. So you can actually get a lot of things sort of off the shelf or, in the cloud now, which and you can integrate them, quite.
The API that they talk to each other is much better, because I actually nothing's perfect, even a bespoke system. And so we use Arthur Property Management Software. There's also GoTenant, which is much more user-friendly interface, which may suit for some people. But we like Arthur. It's not a user-friendly interface, but they do offer great training to go with it. And we have got it all synced up with the accounting software. And we do have the online form softwares so that people can do all of the paperwork they need to do, the potential tenants and so on, online, and it all comes. We then put it within the property management software so that everyone can see it. So there's one place to go for everything. But it'd be interesting to see if in the next few years somebody does come up with an all-in-one scenario. But Richard, I kept you a lot longer than I knew it would take longer, and we haven't really touched the surface of all the questions that I would like to ask you. But I just want to remind people, remind you if you're listening and you've been interested in today's conversation, that you will get phenomenal value from the complete guide to property finance. And we will put the link where you can get that, or you can just go on Amazon and look for the complete guide to property finance by Richard Brown. And Richard, tell us about other ways that people can get in touch with you or can work with you. You've got quite a list to go through. So tell us all the ways.
I guess there is a list, isn't there? So if you go to propertyvoice.net, so obviously there's a lot of content there. I pride myself in sharing content, and most of it's free, whether it's podcasts or, not so many blog posts these days. I write some books, as you've alluded to. But I also take it on to a next level. I do work with a few people. I guess you call it mentoring. I have an apprentice program, for example, I run a couple of times a year. My thing is, because I'm busy, by the way, well, one, because I'm busy, and two, I like to work on a very intimate basis with people. That sounds a bit wrong. I like to get to know people really well. So I just work in small groups, or occasionally one-to-one. So the apprentice program is usually 4 people twice a year, or 5 people twice a year, something like that. But that's a lot of fun. It's a 100-day program. And, I call it, I say, also trust the process, because you go through a journey over that period of time, and that evolves. So that's that. Of course, there's capitalliving.co.uk. That's how you could find our rent-to-rent business. Obviously, we've inherited this business, and we're going to make it ours over time. But the previous owner's done really well. It's been established 12 years, and it had a great reputation over that time. In fact, it had such a good reputation, it doesn't have to give deposits sometimes to landlords these days. So because of the track record and the size and the history. So I guess they're the 3 main areas, I think. I do invest myself, and occasionally people do work with me on that side of things. But I'm sure a lot of people who are investors and developers do the same thing.
And there may also be an opportunity you're looking to buy once you get this back on the tracks. It was already well established and on the tracks, but there'll be things that you would like to do as the new owners. Tell us about what kind of rent-to-rent or HMO management businesses you're looking for.
Yeah, so I guess if it's rent-to-rent, we're interested in the higher end and higher service level end of the market. So if you look at Capital Living, for example, the average rents are actually higher than some of the competitors. They're between £800 and £1,200 a month for a room. Some of those with shared bathrooms, so you probably get the picture. Whereas I was talking to another local operator, and they're pegging about £200 a month below that, typically. So, but in order to justify that price tag, we need to do more. So I think what we're trying to do is bring in the co-living, more community, a bit more service, options that are available there. It's been a bit challenging, obviously, in the last few months. So, but equally, I think that's one product. There's another one, which is just good quality rooms, probably with, well fitted out for professionals as well. So we probably would like to take it to other cities. At the moment, it's London. There's a big market in London, but I think the co-living model would work pretty well in a number of other cities. So if you look at places like Leeds or Manchester in particular, perhaps Birmingham, Bristol, there could be some good options there, whether it's the full co-living model or whether it's, just very good quality professional house share, if you want to call it that. And I think from an agency, just to finish, from an agency point of view, I think there's so much compliance now, particularly with HMOs, that your regular letting agent who, they're struggling perhaps to stay on top of everything. So I think we want to set ourselves apart insofar as being, fully compliant, take away those burdens from landlords, and have an experienced team who know their way around the legislation, the regulations, because it's constantly changing. There's such a high bar. So I think we actually see that as an opportunity, funnily enough. We see, the regulation as being, they call it build a moat around your business. Yeah. So that will be a moat. Is if we're good at the regulation, that will keep others away from us a little bit.
And what about the minimum units in any business you would be looking to acquire?
So that kind of depends. So for example, somebody said to me recently, so I'm telling everyone, do you know anyone who's looking to exit their business or perhaps their portfolio or hand it on? And then all sorts of responses come back. And someone said, well, actually, I've got a rent-to-rent business. And I've got to be careful how I say it, but in a well-known southern town, and maybe you would like to take them on. I said, well, how many units do you have? Well, it was 8, but it's now 2.
Oh.
Now, okay. So if we try and go into a new town, which has got 2, which maybe 12 rooms or something, that's not economic for us to kind of run our operation. Unless we can scale pretty quickly, but that wouldn't really be viable. But if it was 8, we can probably make a start. So 8, we can make a start. We can put staff in because we'd have the back office systems. So it would just be the physical presence. So I would say sort of 6, 8. I'm talking about HMOs rather than rooms.
Yeah.
In that sense, and if it's an established business, we can. I mean, we're talking to other players at the moment with hundreds of rooms, so we can go from probably, sort of as numbers I've alluded to, really.
No, great. I was just interested because I thought, well, that was quite a big one, the first one, and you must want to do volume because that makes all the due diligence and everything worth the effort.
Yeah.
Of getting into the game.
One thing we have done, so I've been looking at other options local to where we're based, and a landlord came and said, I've got 3 houses, are you interested? And I'm going, absolutely yes, because we've already got the infrastructure in place, and we add 3 on. That's an easy win for us. Whereas if we go into a new location, that's a difficult equation. So we'd probably look for an acquisition or a partner potentially in a new location. Whereas if it's local to us, we can do 1s, 2s, and whatever.
Yeah. It's very interesting, Richard. I could talk to you all day. A huge congratulations on your book, A Complete Guide to Property Finance. I'm really looking forward to reading it in depth. I've already flicked through it and noted a number of sections to go back to. So as we end today, is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with?
I should have thought that before, shouldn't I, really? So I tell you what, if you, first of all, I'll do a cheat sheet for the book, which will have all of those 50 strategies itemized in it. So just, you can drop me a line, admin@thepropertyvoice.net. Karen, bless her, who's my assistant, will receive that email and make sure you get taken care of. If the book isn't available when you see this, because we've had a glitch, then also drop Karen a note and get on the list, and we'll let you know when that's available. So the cheat sheet, and get on the book list there. And if I can think of anything else, I will let you know, Stephanie, because right now I can't.
Brilliant. Well, I put that on the screen if you're watching us on the website or on YouTube. It's admin, and if you're listening on the podcast, admin@thepropertyvoice.net. So thank you, Richard, for the book, for being such an amazing guest today and giving us such insights into what goes on behind the scenes in buying a large HMO management, aka rent to rent business. So thank you for joining us, Richard. Thank you for watching and listening and spending this time with us today. I really look forward to seeing you again next week. And remember, until then, believe bigger, be bolder, be a game changer. See you soon. Bye for now.